Others is the fact that we have our code of ethics and other things that make ourselves, and I am a member, hopefully some of the higher level of professionalism. And right now, as you know, and I would state the market this way: these markets bring out the best and worst in people. Now, I don't know if you've experienced this. Has anybody experienced that? I mean, some of the best things you want to know from some people who are the true professionals, who are solution-oriented, and then there are other people who just want to get in the way and create problems and mislead. So what we've been doing at the Real Estate Commission is several things. The issues that we're dealing with now are somewhat different than years ago when we were having lots of fun, because we didn't have agency disclosure, for example. We didn't have property condition disclosure. The whole concept of how our agency laws would work in terms of, because I've going to go back to some years when I first started, when I was on the commission once before, early on. So our issues right there were significant. Now that is less of a serious issue, but now we have other things that we're dealing with because many of the things that we're dealing with now are universal and nationwide. Because one of the things that many real estate regulators have a problem with, or a problem is such a bad word, a challenge with, is one, we cannot control the internet. And technology oftentimes is way ahead of any regulation. For example, we have regulations now that we just so you'll know, the new regulations have been published, and we went through a process of reviewing all of our regulations to see if, as we say in trigonometry, if the triangles were congruent. Because we found one rule said this, another rule countered that rule. So we had a committee that worked and hard on this, and I will say, for those of you who know Josephine Ricks, Josephine Ricks kind of headed up this effort, and we got folks together and went through all our regulations to see where they were not connecting, and we did a review of all of our regs. And in fact, in some of the areas that really need reviewing had to do with the World Wide Web and what's happening with the internet. And those are published, and I believe those are available, and I think the dates on those would be April 2013. So that's there. But we looked through and went through and saw all these different things. And unfortunately, sometimes a regulation is passed and technology is way ahead of that. Because at the time we were working on these things, at one point, you didn't have to deal with Twitter. And you didn't have to deal with Facebook. Now, how do you deal with Facebook in terms of marketing? One of the big issues we're dealing with right now, all of you may know, is the issue of advertising. It's a huge issue, and for those who are going to go to the National Convention in New Orleans, one of the areas that they're going to talk about, because I had the pleasure of meeting, we have a meeting for those who attended the mid-year meetings. I think we don't call that the term anymore. I think there's another term for it. Realtor conference.
Realtor party?
Realtor party.
Realtor party. And I sat with an esteemed group of people, because members from ARELO, because I belong to ARELO, the Association of Real Estate Licensed Law Officials. We're an international organization comprised mostly of real estate regulators and educators and directors of real estate departments on the regulatory side. We have a joint meeting with the National Association of Realtors, because we do understand how our roles are so very much connected. And we had on our issues list, I think in the top 5 issues was advertising, because advertising is a huge challenge now, and how people are advertising, what they're saying, what's supposed to be in the ad, that's not in the ad. But when you get to the level of what's going on with technology, we're finding out that we don't always have control. For example, we had one case recently, because a big issue with us right now is, and I'll say a lot of the complaints, in fact, I will suggest that perhaps 25 to 30% of our complaints recently are those where the ad did not have the broker's name and number. And so what happened? Well, individuals who did not have the broker's name and number were fined. Who got fined? The agent who wrote the ad got fined, and the broker got fined. How much did they get fined? Usually somewhere between $1,000 and $1,500, depending. So all these emails were sent out saying, by the way, you need to have your name and number on the ad. That went out 3 or 4 times, and they said, okay, after that, people are starting to get fined. So the fines went out. So an individual got a fine. And after a while, we would get a complaint filed by anonymous with ads circled. Go after these folks. You went after us. And so in many cases, we found there were other ads. Now, That's just in a case where we're dealing with print advertising. So let's just say something that you found on let's just say a Washington Post ad or a strip ad or some other ad. When you get to the internet, it's even a more difficult situation. So we had a case recently where the seller loved their agent so much that the seller put in an ad for the agent. Well, guess what the ad didn't have? Both numbers. So now the agent gets saying you're going to get fined. So when the investigation ensued, they found that the seller actually put the ad on the web that the agent didn't know anything about. It's great to have a seller that loves you that much. Because you know we never do enough advertising and we always pay for it. So that's one of the big issues that we're dealing with right now. And I will say it's not just us, because we always stay very closely aligned with what Maryland is doing. Maryland is doing the same thing. Maryland has, and I don't know if you're licensed in Maryland, you've probably seen your latest newsletter that says the Maryland Real Estate Commission is going to be cracking down on advertising violations. Now, on the one hand, it creates a set of circumstances because there's those who said to me, well, Tony, you know, we're spending all this time investigating names and numbers on the ads. Who's going after the people who are stealing our money, who are ripping off the public? Seems to me that this is something that should be kind of a minor issue, because sometimes it's something that doesn't meet the name and letter of the law, but at the same time, there are things going on right now that are much higher violations with regard to the public. So it's kind of difficult, but we find that a lot of our complaints right now are in the area of advertising, and the broker's name and the broker's number and your name and your number on the ad is something that's important. But otherwise, I think that right now, many of our issues tend to be in the areas where we don't have control. Another item that's going to be coming up that we're going to have to deal with at some point, and that is, how many of you still pay your bills with a check? One or two. Notice that, let the record show, not a lot of hands went up. Now imagine what happens is, for example, I understand, because we had an incredible presentation by Tom Miller, who was the chief counsel for the North Carolina Real Estate Commission, and every one of our conferences, he would give his presentation. Well, Tom gave a presentation, and his presentation was entitled, "What Happens When the Checks Are Gone?" So instead of getting an earnest money deposit check, what do we do when money is transferred electronically? How fast does that money move? If I remember from science class, it moves at 186,000 miles per second. So what you hit enter, that money is gone. At least if you had a check and there was some issue, you're saying, well, we have 7 days to deposit the check. In Maryland, it's 7 days to deposit the check no matter what. You can't say subject to. So you send a check to the title company. But when you start dealing with electronic transfers, that's an issue that is going to be out there for all of us to deal with, because the question becomes, as soon as that money is sent, it's gone. So if someone is going to steal it or not be able to account for it, it creates some real issues for us. And so that's why the big challenge for the real estate commissions, just ourselves and others, is how do we deal with technology? And I happen to have lunch